Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about eating with the hands. This is something that is very common in Africa. And if you never experienced this before, I feel so sorry for you. Eating with one's hands is a fascinating art. You are supposed to lick your fingers one by one after each swallow, starting with the front of each of the four fingers, then their backs, and finally the thumb. Then the entire finger must be taken into the mouth and carefully sucked. The person presiding over the meal is in charge of making sure that these rules are followed carefully. Consequently, any voice you hear rising during a meal is the leader's voice correcting bad eating habits, mostly related to finger licking. Children who are very hungry don't take the time to lick their fingers properly, so someone must be there to instruct them in good table manners. In the seminary, even though spoons, forks, and knives were already provided, we were never prohibited from eating with our hands, except tacitly when a priest was among us. Thus, the only thing from our childhood that I never forgot was eating with my hands. I did so in the seminary as a way to stay in touch with something that seemed ancestral. So even though Malidoma Patrice Some was kidnapped at the age of 5 and brought to this Catholic boarding school and brainwashed, no matter how far removed physically Malidoma was from his family, he never forgot how to eat with his hands, which he felt was something that helped him stay in touch with something ancestral. My brothers were masterful at eating with their hands. Watching them at work around the huge bowl of food was like watching a performance. The agility with which they carried food, solid or liquid, to their mouths had something of the religious about it, as if the food were a living entity performing a life work on behalf of someone who needed it. The fact that eating is done communally and is gender specific adds to its feeling of being a ritual. It took me a while to get used to eating out of a common dish again. Accustomed as I was in the seminary to having my own plate and cutlery, it was rather unpleasant to participate in a meal that seemed, underneath the delicate, artistic, and focused gestures of the diners, like a fierce competition. The speed with which my brothers ate amazed me and discouraged any attempt on my part to rival them. He wouldn't dare try to compete. In the beginning, I took my time, unmindful of running out of food, and so I was always on the verge of not eating enough. At first, I was silent about my hunger, but my mother noticed it and discreetly intervened. She always put an extra plate in my room for me before she went to bed. One night I asked her why. She hesitated, then said, I do not think I can recover from 15 seasons of life without you. But I'm not hungry. I eat well with everybody. You need not tell me this. I'm your mother. Since when are you my mother? She burst into tears. I felt sorry for her. My outburst made me realize, however, that I had not fully forgiven her. I felt cruel and ungrateful, but something prevented me from apologizing. Was my wounded ego all too eager to feed on the feelings of others? He was really upset with her because he felt like they didn't come look for him when he was kidnapped. He felt like, where were you? Why didn't you find me? Why didn't you come look for me? So here he was trying to pay her back when she was just trying to be nurturing. So I love the way he talks about the art of eating with your hands. He's like, you're supposed to lick your fingers one by one after each swallow, starting with the front of each of the four fingers, then the backs, and finally the thumb. I didn't know there was an art. All I know is that my sister friend, right? I call her my sister friend because she's like my sister, but she's my friend. She said, Auntie Regina, come sit down. You know how we do. We always sit in front of one big bowl of food and we eat together. We just dig in. We lick our fingers. Oh, yes, we lick our fingers. But I didn't know there was an art to it. Nobody bothered to correct me because they could tell I was just in my element, enjoying myself. So he goes on to really trying to dig in after he told his mother, Mother defended herself. After we found out you were gone, I cried for months on end. I had a big fight with your father and asked him to find you and bring you home. He went out to get you several times, sometimes spending days away before returning empty-handed. Where did he go? I was just up the hill. How could he not find me? I knew, and he also knew very well where you were. The priests, the priests, those priests. Your father was going against the will of the foreign god, but we fought anyway. It was no use. The priest kept saying that only God could release you if he changed his mind. In the meantime, he would not let anyone interfere with you. So your father prayed for your release, and I cried for it. I could not pray. I was too angry at God. Believe me, it was a nightmare for all of us. Imagine this. And this is it. So, according to Mother, I was a victim of the divine will. The thought rolled through my mind, clothed in irony. If it was God's will that I be snatched from my home, whose God was that? You believe that the priest on the hill was equipped with the power to detect the slightest will of God? What makes God happy or angry or indifferent? That's an odd power. A lot of what I had said was in French. Even though I had been home for nearly 9 months, I still did not have enough vocabulary to articulate everything in plain Dagra because I lost my language at such an early age and learned another under such terrible duress. I was never again able to communicate in Dagra with anywhere near my fluency in French or English. I can't even think in my native language. And to the best of my memory, I never did. So look at that. He was like, we were just up the hill. I didn't really go anywhere. How could my father not find me? This is what Malidoma Patrice Some experienced. This is what he said to his mom. But you imagine, the priest said we cannot release him, that only God could release him if he changed his mind. You imagine that? Crazy. They wanted their son back, but they felt that they were doing him a favor. But when I look at this whole thing, right, think about it. Malidoma says, even though I had been home nearly 9 months, he still did not have enough vocabulary to articulate in his mother tongue, in Dagra. He lost his language. He says he couldn't even think in his native language. And he can't even remember if he ever did, because that's how far back he had been kidnapped. 15 years. And Africans often say that they can't find words in English to translate their language sometimes. And they say African language is very deep and expressive, and I'm not surprised. But what do you do when you never knew your native tongue? What do you do like somebody like me? And same thing with Malidoma, to show you the trauma and the damage that's done to your people, to wipe out the memory of how you even thought. The mind, the way we process things is different. I always compare like a dog and a cat. They're both animals, but they think differently. They look at things differently. Hence, the African. The African thinks differently from the non-African. And this is something we must relearn only if we're willing to take the journey. I will read more from this book so you can get an idea as to some of the things that you may be able to work on and some of the things you just can enjoy from reading it to understand that our people are people of depth beyond our comprehension. Thank you for listening. Peace and love.